Good morning, Taco Price with the Alzheimer's Association. I'm going to let her introduce herself and her role with the organization here in just a moment. But first, I want to remind our viewers, last week, we talked about the 10 signs of early detection. And now I feel like the next step would be, how do you communicate the diagnosis to the loved one? And that's where you come in, Taco, and your expertise. So please take it away.
Well, thank you, Theba. As you said, my name is Taco Price. I'm the Director of Programs and Services with the Alzheimer's Association. And believe it or not, we get this question a lot. Once we educate people about what those 10 warning signs are, then people say, okay, well, maybe it's time for us to go see a doctor. I've noticed some things, my loved one has noticed some things, but how do I get them there? Because I asked them if they wanted to go to the doctor and it was a hard no. And so what I always recommend for family members, loved ones, one of the easiest things that you can do is to just physically make notes of some of the changes that you have observed in your loved one, because it's by doing that, then you're able to say, soften the conversation a little bit. I've noticed that you've made some, that you're having difficulty doing some things that you've always done in the past. I've noticed that you are starting to forget the ingredients in that cherry pie that you've been making for the last 30 years that we love so much. Would you be willing to go to the doctor so we can talk about what may be causing that change? Sometimes it's making sure that you make note of whatever those changes are and be willing to have a collaborative conversation with your loved one, and not so much necessarily saying, I think we need to go to the doctor because you might have Alzheimer's. Naturally, that's not the approach to take, because then you'll need to disarm them. They're going to say no, they're going to be resistant. So there are a couple of tips that we always try to share with people, that being one of them. But I also think what's really important is to make sure that we remember that the essence of the person is still there. They're still grandma, they're still grandpa, they're still our moms and our dads, and we have to make sure that they're part of that decision, because it is a difficult decision. And then certainly making sure that they know that they are not alone. So I think it's important to also reassure your loved one that I'm not just going to go and drop you off at the doctor's office and let you have that conversation. I'm going to be there with you. I'm going to help you ask those questions. I'm going to make sure we're not going to leave that doctor's office until we really understand everything that he or she has said to us. And then more importantly, we're going to make sure we know what's next in the journey. I do think also that what I find the 3 most difficult points of conversations to have with family members, Theba, really center around going to the doctor. What are we going to do about driving? When do we make a decision about whether or not a person should continue to drive? And then also conversations that really pertain to any legal or financial decisions that a family has to make post-diagnosis.
Yeah, and those can be all separate conversations.
I know.
Again, are so dense and have such an emotional component to them. I remember when my father was beginning to struggle, he was so different than my mom. He was waving the white flag. He was like, I need help. Something's wrong. Help me. Mom was a different case. So I've had these 2 different approaches to recognizing these changes and talking to them. And I think what I noticed right off the top is my own fear.
Yes.
Gets mixed in with trying to talk to them. That gets them afraid. So there's just so much going on. And I think that's something we can definitely talk about at a later date, is how do you personally begin to process it, take care of your own thoughts and emotions centering around these changes, because they're just as dramatic as what they're going through at the very beginning. So
and sometimes that fear that the care partner, the family member experiences, sometimes that prevents them from taking the next step of advocacy, right, for their loved one, and not scheduling the appointment. So I also recommend practicing. identifying somebody else in the family who you can kind of create just a little family care team, somebody that if you're going to be the lead, have to take the lead on helping your loved one make those make those decisions, whether they be medical, financial, to find someone else in the family. Even it could even be a close friend, a neighbor. Neighbors are going to be very important in this journey as well, so that you can help. They can help you develop a plan. They can help you practice what you're going to say. How are you going to respond if you get some resistance from your loved one? So I do think that working through that caregiver fear is very valid. And of course, also don't be afraid to see the Alzheimer's Association as a part of that care team, because we are here to help and to help people navigate through those conversations, through those decisions. Of course, that makes it a little bit easier. Doesn't totally solve the problem, but it makes it a lot easier if you do have a support system of people who can help just troubleshoot, plan ahead, practice what you're going to say, how you're going to say it.
Absolutely. When I started taking classes, that's when I could settle down and realize that there were conversations, there were terms, there were other organizations that of support. It made it easier to move forward because you didn't feel so alone. And that was key. And then just, once you learn a method or an approach, it takes time and habit to begin to
You
take
know
care of
what I
that.
found? Someone shared with me after one of our education programs, they asked the question, how do I get my mom to accept the fact that I think she has Alzheimer's? And my recommendation was, don't use the word Alzheimer's. And so sometimes it's really a matter of using using words that are going to be most comfortable for the person you're having the conversation with. And sometimes don't use the big A word. Sometimes it's using phrases like, have you noticed that you're having changes in memory, thinking, or behavior? I've noticed this. What about you? The moment, because sometimes a person or a family, especially depending on what community you live in, that's a scary word. Alzheimer's and dementia, that's
Yeah.
scary. And so automatically, it puts up some resistance. People really don't know what that means, especially if they haven't done some research, contacted our organization. So sometimes it may be just as simple as the way we're describing some of the changes in behavior, memory, and thinking that we're observing as a family member or a community member, a church member. And then that makes it a little bit easier to say, as opposed to, do you think you have dementia? Has anyone ever talked to you about Alzheimer's? Sometimes if we describe some of the behavior changes that we're seeing, or changes in memory or even thinking, it doesn't always mean that if a person's experiencing this at the early stage that they're just going to start forgetting things. I think it's important for people to also recognize that this disease may present itself very differently in many people, and it doesn't always start with just simply forgetting something. It could be a thought process may be changing. It could be something as simple or something as a little bit more complicated in terms of behavior changes, as I'm sure we talked about last week when we highlighted some of those warning signs. So I think that's important to also notice that sometimes you don't have to say the words Alzheimer's and dementia. Sometimes you can simply just describe some of the behavior or changes that you're noticing in your loved one as well.
I think that's great advice. And I want to thank you again, Taco. And I know that we're going to be talking again because this is a very, as I said, very dense conversation. There's so many facets, so many complications, and it's all tied into this emotional component uh, of your loved one and you. So I want to just tell our viewers that Taco is available at the Alzheimer's Association to talk with you personally about how to talk to your loved one. So please give her a call. And again, thank you again, Taco.
You're welcome. And I'm sure we talked about last week that we do have a 24-hour helpline. So Theba, if you would share that information, we can't share that resource enough, because sometimes it's 3 o'clock in the morning when you have a question, or a person who just may be struggling and not knowing what to do. That helpline is there, always available, for anyone who has a question that may be very simple or very complex in terms of safety concerns, safety issues, things of that nature. That number is 1-800-272-3900. And of course, I'm here, as Theba said, just to answer any questions and support anyone who's caregiving for someone or living with the disease.